Hello everyone. Welcome to another episode of At War. Thank you to everyone who tuned into our last episode on the Afghan peace process. Today, we'll be speaking on Sino-Russian engagements in South Asia and their possible implications on Pakistan. We are joined today by Syed Ali Zia Jaffery, who is a foreign affairs and strategic affairs analyst. Ali is a research associate at the University of Lahore Center for Security, Strategy and Policy Research, where he focuses on foreign policy and nuclear deterrence strategy. He is also the associate editor of Pakistan Politico and has served as a visiting fellow at the Stimson Center. Thank you for joining us, Ali.
Thank you, Mubashar, for having me. I have been following At War ever since it started, and I must say that you engage some excellent speakers for discussions on some of the most important topics that the region has to and should discuss. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we start, would you give our audience a background on and some context on Russia's recent engagements in South Asia, and it's also its growing partnership with China?
Okay, so I would divide this answer into two parts. Rather, I would give you two reasons for this. One is the vacuum, and the other is the appetite for filling that vacuum. So the vacuum that was created in South Asia and the entire region was of the US retrenchment from the region. The US was trying to pull out from Afghanistan. The US was finding it very difficult to negotiate with Iran despite signing the JCPOA. And the US was not on good terms with Pakistan. And of course, add to the mix the ever so brewing US-Sino rivalry. So that gave Russia a very good pretext of, putting into practice or starting off with what Putin called the Greater Eurasian Partnership. So what Putin wants to do for Russia is to pivot to the east. The Russians believe that it's time for Russia to connect to its roots, which lie in Asia and to the east. And the idea is to strengthen and to bolster a Eurasian partnership that relies on primarily linking the Eurasian Economic Union with China's BRI. So that is the context, and that is what drove Russia to this region. And one of the underlying factors for that equation was that Russia had to reassert its power. Russia had to play a very significant role in global affairs, as was enunciated in its concept of foreign policy released in 2016. So the idea was for Russia to play a lead role in shaping international conflicts and in a bit to reassert itself as a power to reckon with. Because, ever since the end of the Cold War, Russia was receded as a power, as a global power. So it wanted to reassert itself. And the vacuum that the Americans provided gave Russia an ideal opportunity to start its forays into South Asia. And part of that equation, or the crux of fulfilling that aim, lies in Russia not being at loggerheads with China. So if you want to move to the east, it would be foolish for you to take on the dragon or take on the elephant in the room. China, while being a benign force, is a force to reckon with. And it is only prudent for any nation, including Russia, to mend fences with the powerful country in the region. And Russia believes, and there are statements to corroborate that claim. Russia believes that its ties with China are critical to achieving its broader goal in Eurasia. And the linkage, the linchpin that Russia is looking at is China. And that is why the relationship is strengthening by the day. Because there is this complementarity between the two. The complementarity is that while Russia gives China access to European markets, China gives Russia access to the East. So this is a very good blend that both countries have created. Now we can say that obviously Russia does not want any other power to to usurp its own area and sphere of influence in Central Asia, but it is a necessity that the Russians are cognizant of. And there was a recent book authored by Daniel Markey titled China's Western Horizon. I reviewed that last year, and he made a very good statement in the book. He said that China-Russia partnership, coupled with United States' growing acrimony with Russia, has given an ideal opportunity for both countries to paper over their differences. So he also said that China is not trying to disturb the equation in Central Asia. So while Central Asia could be considered as a very tenuous spot for Russia-China relations, but they are meddling along well so far because of United States unilateral actions against Russia, and the fact that Russia is not the West is hell bent upon isolating Russia. Although I believe that isolation is not a term that we should be using in this globalized context. I don't believe in this term at all. You cannot isolate countries. It's very difficult. Let's suppose neither Pakistan can be isolated nor India can be isolated. It is a hoax, and I think the term should be revisited going forward.
Right. I want to build on something you said about Russia's appetite and Russia's desire to reassert itself. Professor Stephen Kotkin from Princeton, he is the author of perhaps some of the most comprehensive works on the history of, on the life of Joseph Stalin. He, in a recent talk, when speaking about Russia and particularly Russia's engagements in the Middle East, he characterizes Russia as a declining power. And he says it's more Russia's is just trying to stay relevant in global power dynamics. Would you agree with this characterization? And if I add Russia's involvement in South Asia into the mix as well, particularly at the Afghan peace process, does Russia really have a role to play in all of this? And so last week when we had Fahad Humayun here, he said regional powers like Russia can actually play a role in the Afghan peace process. So if you could also shed some light on that as well.
I think this is a good set of questions that you have posed. I think I would not like to call Russia a declining power. I would like to call Russia a rejuvenated power, or a power that wants to rejuvenate itself, resurge on the global stage. So yes, wherever you will find that your adversary is dilly-dallying, or your adversary is on a weaker wicket, like the Americans were and are in Afghanistan, as a rational actor in global politics, you will definitely try to ingress in that area. So the Russians they saw the writing on the wall that the US was not willing to budge an inch on its position regarding the Taliban back in the day, while Trump was very adamant in bringing his troops home. Still, a lot of things were happening in Afghanistan which made us believe that a military-heavy policy in Afghanistan is what the Americans are looking at, and this is what was happening. So the Russians started their peace overtures in Afghanistan, Moscow talks, and the idea for them was that they should create a process whereby a political dialogue could be initiated between various warring parties, including the administration in Kabul and the Taliban. So we could say that they were on the same page with Pakistan and other regional stakeholders, minus the United States. So Russia started those initiatives, and because it felt that there is a gap that can be filled through means that the US is not adopting. So let me pause here. Let me take you back to the end of 2017 and the start of 2018. So there were 3 back-to-back documents were released: the National Security Strategy, the National Defense Strategy, and the Nuclear Posture Review. If we even were to keep the Nuclear Posture Review aside, the two documents, the National Defense Strategy and the National Security Strategy, clearly outlined Russia and China as two of the principal threats facing the United States, and those which the United States should have countered, should and must counter over and above the threat of terrorism. So one of the things was that while China is using predatory economics to subvert and to reconfigure the so-called rules-based international order, Russia is trying to disintegrate NATO, and Russia is trying to intrude into open spaces. So while the US had said that Russia is the main threat, obviously Russia being one of the actors in the global system, it also obviously had those apprehensions. So perhaps it found Afghanistan as a soft belly, as an underbelly, where it could have played a role. And another reason, and a very immediate reason for Russia's interest in Afghanistan, was related to the ISIS. Russia was not and is not willing to let ISIS consolidate itself in Afghanistan, because that would then be a great security threat to the Russians because of its Afghanistan's proximity to Central Asia. And again, going back to where we started from, the whole idea behind the Greater Eurasian Partnership would be of little use absent peace in Afghanistan. And this is exactly what Pakistan says, that Pakistan's capacity, Pakistan's propensity, and Pakistan's bid to be a vehicle of economic connectivity and integration is contingent upon peace and stability in Afghanistan. So the same goes for Russia. So if we want to, let's suppose, embark on that CPEC initiative, linking the northern part of CPEC with Central Asia and beyond, so both countries need peace. Now, this is where the role of Russia comes into the mix. I do understand that many countries are playing a role in the Afghan peace process, and many of them agree on a lot of things that are taking place with regard to the Afghan peace process. The greater the stakes, the greater the role. But can Russia use that role and those stakes to influence the outcome in Afghanistan? That I'm not sure of. Because whether we like it or not, the US, the Taliban, and the government in Kabul, these three warring parties are pretty adamant in their own maximalist positions. So unless the gridlock is resolved, unless somebody with influence on all of those plays an exceedingly important role, I don't see Russia in and of itself playing a great and a very I want to use this word, a very kind of a distinctive role in the Afghan peace process, which could have a decisive impact. So this is something that we need to understand. A lot of processes have taken place on multiple tracks. Pakistan has been a very important actor. Russia has been an important actor. Iran's growing ties with Taliban are also a factor that has affected the Afghan peace process in more ways than one. So a lot of things are happening, but the ultimate movers and shakers of the Afghan peace initiative and the Afghan peace process are those three warring parties which are not ready to budge an inch from their maximalist positions.
Right. It's very interesting, and let's just steer the conversation a little bit towards the US and Russia and China. I'm going to ask two very short one-word questions from you. Do you ever see a situation where Russia and the US would be allied against China? Yes, yes or no, and I'll build upon that in a bit.
It does not merit a yes or no answer. But
okay, sure. Then I'll expand on the question. I consider myself as an adherent of the structural realist school of IR, and I followed the works of scholars like Mearsheimer and Stephen Walt a lot in this regard. So back in the early 2000s, Professor Mearsheimer, he came up with this whole theory that why as China's economic growth will translate into military power, its rise will not be peaceful, because as China wants to become a regional hegemon, the US, which has had a history of not liking peer competitors when it comes to regional hegemons, it would want to contain China's growth. He gives the example of how the US contained Imperial Germany during World War One, Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan during World War Two, and then the Soviet Union post World War Two. And some of his predictions have come true in this regard. We saw Hillary's infamous pivot to Asia, and the Obama administration, switching towards Asia during his second term. But where I disagree somewhat with Mearsheimer is he says that to balance China, the United States would depend on a balancing coalition of states like India, the coastal states in the Pacific, and also Russia. Do you foresee that happening, that Russia joining the US camp just to contain China?
I don't foresee that, and I say this because, with all due respect to the great Mearsheimer, I've read him a lot for all the nuclear and non-nuclear purposes, to put it very frankly. I think confronting China is not, as of now, in the strategic interests of Russia. So realism, whether it's structural or classical or whatever, is hinging upon national interests. So it would be difficult for us to imagine in the near future that Russia would ally with its strategic competitor in the United States to challenge China. Now, China is part of the region. China is here to stay. America, at the end of the day, is an extra regional power. And as Nehru used to say in the Cold War era, Asia for Asians. So I think gone are the days when there was a Sino-Soviet split. We saw a very famous crisis take place in 68, 69. Gone are those days. The dependency between the two countries is mutual, it's robust, and it's ever growing. And China's geo-economic juggernaut dovetails nicely with Russia's dream of recalibrating the Asian order. So Russia does not have the vehicles right now to mount a challenge to China in a manner that also does not give its main competitor, the United States, an upper hand. So I'm not saying that Russia and China are best buds. They can't be best buds, because Russia at the end of the day would want to be at par, or even to be a greater power than China. But for that to happen, Russia needs China for now. And Russia would never want to give the United States an upper hand. So these are the theatrics of global politics. You have to choose a lesser evil, and for Russia right now, China is the lesser evil because of its strategic orientation. If the orientation were to be different, then obviously we could have said that okay, the Russians could hobnob with the US and counter China, but I don't see that happening. It has got a lot to do with how the West has continually slapped sanctions on Russia. The West is, especially the US, is at loggerheads with Russia in the Middle East. So a lot of things compound. And again, going back to this recent book written by Dan Markey, he said that Putin is blinded by anti-Americanism. So that has Putin is here to stay for the next 5 to 6 years. So he will more than likely leave a mark, and he would not like to, come off the ramp to accommodate the US and to counter a partner that is giving it a lot of strategic advantages. Not least because it is trying to fit in well with with Russia's Eurasia policy, but also because Russia wants to play a significant role in shaping global conflicts and in shaping the resultant or the ensuing peace processes. So Russia can't do that alone. So it needs China to complement it and to complement and amplify its efforts, just because it has to come to the US. So this is what.
So and if I borrow another phrase from Scheimer, he always says that states want to become the biggest bully in the playground. So if Russia continues to grow using China as as a growth mechanism, there will come a point when Russia and China might feel that the other power has become too big for their own strategic concerns. Then what do you think would happen?
Then yes, but look, if Russia is expanding, if Russia expands, China would also be expanding. So both the balance of clout would determine what shape their relations take going forward. Just because they have a common competitor in the United States, would it be something reasonable to argue that Russia could going forward take on China without United States support? No. So why would Russia take United States support in countering China, even if it has to counter China? It would rather do it alone, but it would not be in a position to do it alone, because China's dream, which involves and which wants to involve a host of countries in the mix, is too big to be shattered by these gimmickries. So if, let's suppose, 60 to 80 countries jump on the BRI bandwagon, and those countries would then be lying right next to China, to Russia's periphery, it would be very difficult for Russia to break free and then counter China. It can only counter China going forward if it is to take United States help, and that I don't see as a possibility, even a remote possibility going forward. So I think this is not likely to happen. And the other important thing here is that China does not look at international relations the way the US looks. So China may not give Russia the impression that it is trying to be the preponderant country in the region, and its growth is happening at the expense of Russia. So this is something that we need to understand. China's growth model, China's bid to expand the tentacles of power, is not something that would make other countries uncomfortable, especially countries with which China has strong strategic partnership, and Russia is one of those. So this is something that we need to bring into our discourse when we talk about Russia and China.
Agreed. And I would add one more criticism to Western scholarship in this regard, and I think the same applies to the India-Pakistan situation as well. That when they're analyzing relations between the US and Russia, and then trying to project what might happen in the future, they always think from a very US centric lens. So, even these conversations about, Kashmir being a nuclear flashpoint and how India and Pakistan's behavior might, translate into a nuclear war or not, that's another debate. But my point is, the US has never been in an adversarial relation with country with which it has a lot of geographic proximity. Russia and China, at the end of the day, they share borders. Pakistan and India, at the end of the day, they share borders. So Western scholars might want to, beat the drum of war that, all hell is going to break loose, but they don't realize the on ground realities in our backgrounds.
Absolutely.
So coming down from the macro level to let's focus on South Asia, and in the context of the same question of how the US would want to create a balancing coalition to contain China, a lot is made of the US and India partnership. We are given examples of the United States pushing for an NSG waiver for India, the civilian nuclear deal between the US and India in 2008. But in this regard, recently there's been a lot of outcries, specifically in some quarters of the Indian strategic circles, about the freedom of navigation operations by the US Navy in the Indian Ocean. Going forward, as India, tries to get deeper into American orbit, do you think this is something that would increase, or as some people in Pakistan would like to believe, do you think this is a sign of things going sour between the US and India?
Okay, before I answer this question, I would agree with you on how the West sees other conflicts in other regions through a very narrow lens, and the framework is limited to those old theories of international relations which normally would not apply to every other country. Let's take the example of theories on deterrence, theories on escalation. What was applicable during the Cold War, let's say the 44-rung escalation ladder introduced by Herman Kahn, might not be applicable to South Asia because the dynamics are very different.
Of course.
So I always say that the West knows about South Asia, but the West does not necessarily understand South Asia.
Absolutely.
Knowledge and understanding are two different things. So they do not understand the dynamics of South Asia because they're applying their own models to assess South Asia. So that is something that needs to change, and it would only change if original thinking is channeled out of this region through the help of young scholars like you. So this is something that we need to understand. If we want to enrich the discourse on South Asian strategic stability, on South Asian deterrent stability, we need to put in the hard yards when it comes to expanding the literature on these subjects. And we must use our own lens. So the other day I was talking to someone and I was saying that the only country that Russia supports is Russia. You talked about structural realism. You talk about any kind of theory in international relations. At the crux of those all lies this inherent commitment to your own national interests. So we should not be borrowing strength from anybody, or we should not be excited or overexcited about certain events happening in our periphery and in the wider region. Now, coming to your point regarding the freedom of navigation operation that took place yesterday, day before yesterday. Look, I firmly believe that the Pakistanis and the Americans know each other. They have worked together, they have had peace, they have fought together, they have messed things up together. So they know each other. They know how to figure out a way. They'll navigate troubled waters. But the US and India do not know each other as much. So there is this palpable tension. The tension is that the US thinks that India would cling on to its so-called strategic autonomy, while the Indians feel that US would not do enough. They also even crib as to why the US has not been able to punish Pakistan for its so-called acts of terrorism. And हमेशा से उनका यही रहा है कि the US bails out Pakistan, which is absolutely debatable. In fact, there is a lot that one can discuss, and for that we need a separate session. But now, the structure of global politics, the structure of the region, demands closeness between India and the US. Replace India with any other country in that place. It could be Timbuktu, it could be Zimbabwe. If Zimbabwe was at this place where India is, we would have had strong relations between US and Zimbabwe. So, to counterbalance China, the US needs India. So these, bickering, these kinds of bickering do take place. It's not a big deal. So nothing has happened day before yesterday that demands a jubilation from Pakistani voters. Pakistan, of course, has not responded, and why should it respond? It is not. We should stay out of it. Sit this one out. So, if we are thinking that starting Monday, the US and China, the US and India would, cut off their ties, it's not happening. This is not how states behave. Just because of one thing, we have differences with China. I'm sure there are many a difference when it comes to Pakistan-China relations, but that does not mean that we have, broken off with China. Look, we have tried to renegotiate the terms of a China-Pakistan economic corridor. Much has been made of that. CPEC is dead narrative was proliferated. CPEC has slowed down. China has dumped Pakistan. A lot of things came to the fore, but still Pakistan and China are going strong. So this is how the US and India would go on to continue their partnership, and these things do not carry much weight as far as I'm concerned. And these things happen once you're in a partnership. Once two different countries with different strategic orientations, despite having mutual interests in some areas, when they interact, these things are bound to happen. So, but we should not, inflate, or we should not overhype the effects of this little bout of indiscretion that took place. And it's not even an indiscretion. The Americans do not at times recognize EEZs when it comes to navigating. So I think I'm not reading too much into it, and this is how it should be.
So sticking with India, and this might come across as a slightly provocative question, but I would love to hear your thoughts on this. Some people might argue that amidst all of this global power struggle that's been going on in South Asia, India has managed to play its cards really well. India was able to gain a waiver on the import of Iranian oil, even when the sanctions kicked in. Russia remains India's biggest arms supplier, and now at the same time, India is getting weapons from the West. Even US suppliers are now trying to sell weapons to India. So could it be argued that the US-India partnership is perhaps overblown because India does not follow the US into everything, and when it comes to things that it wants, so for example the Afghan peace process, India has managed to somehow creep into the whole conversation, to say the least. So do you think India is the real winner out of all of this?
I would not say that. I would not go so far. India is not the winner. Again, going back to the structure, it is the structure that has highlighted India as a counterweight to China. It is not as much a result of India's brilliance or diplomatic nous. It is a result of just in India being where India is. Obviously, India rode a roughshod over others when it came to foreign relations, because there was a time when the Indian economy was going great guns. So that helped. Uh, Nobody would refuse to give you defense articles if you have the money to buy them. So if I am the seller, and if you have the required money, I would give you what you want. Why would I refuse taking bucks from you? So this is as simple as that. You talked about the fact that India is, having the best of both the worlds, if I were to put it mildly. Um, Look, international relations does not uh, follow an either or principle. It does not and should not follow a zero sum game. So you could have relations with two diametrically opposite countries, and it would be not so wise to say that, okay, if you are talking to me, you should not be talking to my enemy. This is not how the cookie crumbles. So we need to understand this. Uh, Coupled with this is my assertion that you cannot isolate any country in a globalized world. So if India talks about the Afghan peace process, so it does not change things on ground. Um, India has not been able to achieve its goals in Afghanistan. The goal which relates to crushing Pakistan by sandwiching it has not borne fruit, because Pakistan has played the game very well. But for us to say that Pakistan is wholly and solely responsible for bringing together all parties on the table is a bit too far-fetched. I say this because, we have not done a good job when it comes to selling our narrative. Our narrative, despite us doing greatly and meritoriously in the war on terror, has not corresponded with those sacrifices and those things. So it is doubly important for us to match our enunciations with our official policy. So our official policy is that we do not have that big a clout in Afghanistan which could allow us to single-handedly shape the outcome in Afghanistan. So if we are told that, look, Pakistan has kicked out India from Afghanistan, Pakistan has brought Russia, Iran, China, everybody on the same table. So in effect, you are corroborating the American version. This is exactly what the Americans tell us. The Americans have been saying all along that had it not been for Pakistan's subversive role, we would have won the war in Afghanistan. And this is what we deny, and rightly so, because we say that we do not have the prowess and the capacity to shape the outcome in Afghanistan. And what we can do is just to facilitate dialogue between warring parties to an extent. The onus to complete the peace process, much to the benefit of Afghanistan, Pakistan, and the wider region and beyond, lies on the Afghans and the US administration. So, but when you say this, the US could snap back and say, okay, this is exactly what we tell you. If you can do so much, then it's your responsibility to get the Taliban to stop fighting.
Of course, yeah.
But Pakistan does not and cannot do as much as people expect them to do. This is only fair for us to say that look, we had a role. We played that role to the best of our abilities, and we'll continue to push for that. But that's it. Pakistan cannot be made a scapegoat. So for Pakistan to not be made a scapegoat, Pakistan has to understand, and Pakistan does understand, but it's important for Pakistan to ensure that the correct narrative goes out at all levels, official, semi-official, and generally. So there is a need for us to educate how we want to go about things. I've heard a lot of people say that a bloc will be created. Turkey would be in that bloc, China would be in that bloc, Iran would be in that bloc. But Pakistan officially says we are not into bloc politics. So why do you want to give the impression that we want to create a bloc? Why should there be a bloc? Do we want to, supersede our own interests and pool them in a bid to make a bloc?
Have we been part of blocs in the past?
We have been part of blocs in the past. Why do we need to? Look, we officially, Pakistan has been very categorical. Pakistan says, and I quote Dr. Moeed Yusuf here, he said in one of his talks at the Atlantic Council last year, he said, if one country invests 10 billion rupees in Pakistan, or establishes 10 plants in Pakistan, and if the other wants to establish 20, more than welcome. So when we are trying to project this narrative, then all these, talk and euphoria regarding bloc does not make sense. And this is a world where everything is picked. Social media is monitored. Everything is monitored. So one has to be very careful and choose words correctly and very adroitly, to say the least.
Absolutely. And, as we come back, bring the conversation towards Pakistan, they say that people who do not learn from their past mistakes have to repeat them. If we look at the era of the Cold War, Pakistan, some might argue we completely put all our eggs in the American basket, and perhaps that didn't play out too well for us. Now, when we find ourselves again in a multipolar great power competition, how do you think, what's the best way for Pakistan to, balance between China and Russia, who are in our own neighborhood, but also the US, which, whether anyone likes it or not, is probably going to stay a great power for the next century or so?
Look, we could say anything. We could say that, look, the Americans, if you cross the line, will do this and will do that. But we also need to be pragmatic. We must not forget that our power base, our military power especially, is a product of our partnership with the US during the Cold War. Our nuclear program was expedited, it was facilitated because the US, as Dr. Rabia writes in a book, turned a blind eye because of its geostrategic interest in Afghanistan. So somebody was saying the other day that we have gained nothing from the US. I think that's a very unfair statement. The US has been as unfair to us as any other actor would have been. If our interests with China were to become capricious going forward, China would also act very unfairly. The Russians would also act very unfairly. So, Putin is not Imran's cousin. Putin is no friend of Pakistan. Putin is only a friend of Russia. We need to get this straight. So, because the US is an extra-regional power, its interests with Pakistan may not converge with any country for a longer period of time. So that, inconsistency is a given. Now, what Pakistan has to do is, it is very difficult, but Pakistan has to do this. Pakistan has to take its ties with China, with Russia, with the US, and with other countries separately from each other. It has to deal with them separately. It should not be using lenses to look at each relationship. We cannot expect Russia to ditch India. Just because Russia is aligning with us or Russia wants to align with us, we should look at pak-Russia relations in its own right. In their own right. Beg your pardon. So if Russia wants to expand tactical level cooperation with Pakistan on counterterrorism, brilliant. We should go for it. If Russia wants to invest in energy projects inside Pakistan, brilliant. Go for it. But we should not let India dictate our foreign policy. So when we focus on what India is doing all the time, and we make our relations, we make our relations dependent upon how certain sets of countries deal with India, then I think it's not something good. Pakistan is a very important and a very powerful country in its own right, and it should take decisions, it should enter into agreements, it should enter into partnerships by just looking at its own interests. I can understand. We are hearing this geoeconomics mantra since a long, of late. We're hearing this. It's very good. It is the way to go forward. But when we talk about geo, that automatically brings your location into the mix. So our geo-economic potential is a product of our geostrategic potential. So both are intertwined. So we need to understand that. We need to have a very good working relationship with the US. We need to expand our strategic relations with China. And we need to obviously take incremental steps towards improving relations with Russia. All of this would not be easy to do simultaneously. There would be many challenges, but the greater the challenges, the greater the opportunities.
Of course.
The idea here is that look, your ability to navigate foreign policy challenges is but a function of your strength at home. If you will be strong at home, if you will reform your economy, if you will be able to reform your judicial system, if you will be able to actually expand the concept of security to make the citizens of Pakistan and the youth of Pakistan especially more secure, you will be in a better position to play an assertive role when it comes to foreign relations. So this is something that we need to understand. I'll take this opportunity to also briefly talk about the Middle East. I do believe whatever happens in one region affects to a certain degree the events in the other region as well. So what's happening in the Middle East, Pakistan cannot stay aloof because of a host of factors. So again, we are an emotional people. Rightly so, we take pot shots at Saudi Arabia for, being all chummy with Modi, and we take pot shots at the United Arab Emirates for, awarding Modi And even we were very angry when Saudi Arabia invited the Indian Army chief. But we cannot dictate them. We cannot. We don't have the clout. We don't have the influence to dictate them. So if you want to get into that position, you should work on tilting the balance of influence in your favor. So if the Saudis have leverage over us, we also have leverage over them. But as of now, unfortunately, this Riyadh's leverage on us is more because Riyadh bailed us out when we were staring at default.
Yep.
So imagine if the situation is reversed, then we would be in a position to tell them, okay, look, don't go towards India. This is not something good. So we need to work on putting things right at home. We need to reform. This is one word that I'll repeat all the time, because that would feed into your military power, that would feed into your economic power, and that would feed into your overall spectrum of power as far as foreign policy is concerned. Another thing, while we lambaste Saudi Arabia, we also, so I don't want to say this, but let me say this. I do believe that there are lobbies in Pakistan. We have the Saudi lobby, we have the GCC lobby, we have the Iranian lobby, we have the Qatari lobby that comes in GCC. But I don't see a Pakistani lobby. So let's try to establish a Pakistani lobby that says, okay, if Iran is giving us some benefits in this and this area, grab them. If the Saudis are giving us certain strategic breathing space, certain strategic pathways, grab it. If Malaysia is helping us turn a page in regard to our tourism industry, take it. The more you will be strong from inside, the more you will be able to conduct an independent foreign policy. Sovereignty is a very, very fancy concept. It is the concept that dictates the Westphalian system. But sovereignty is also subjective. And sovereignty is not only compromised when an aircraft or a package of aircraft crosses the border. It is attenuated when you are asked to take decisions that you normally do not want to take. So for Pakistan to avoid walking a tightrope, Pakistan has to work on expanding and increasing its power base, and that will then feed into our overall complex of power, and that will help us, navigate foreign policy challenges going forward.
And so some very interesting points there. With the question of Saudi Arabia and Iran, I always say that we are willing to become a battleground for proxy warfare between other countries without considering their implications on what might happen to Pakistan as a result. Also, I'm glad you raised the point that it's very frustrating to see that there's a lot of voices in the Pakistani strategic community who tend to analyze everything that's happening through an Indian lens. So even when the Russian foreign minister was in Pakistan this past week, there were some who were saying that this means that India and Russia are no longer getting along. We should just, it's frustrating that why can't we just look at things from a Pakistani perspective? That what can Pakistan gain from all of this? Everything ultimately for some people comes down to, what does this mean for India?
Look, the worst thing to do is to outsource your policy to somebody else. Your policy should be in your hands. So why should we look out the window and use a binocular and say, look, India ne ye kiya to abhi humne ye karna. In certain aspects, that is important, especially in the nuclear realm. That's important, but we could have a long discussion on that and why do we do that and why that is important. But at times, you need to take a very, very different course. Until unless you won't take that course and you won't take that route, it will be very difficult for you to assert yourself. why should we bother as to what the Russian foreign minister did in India? They have a very old and a very deep relationship. We need to understand that they are allies since the very beginning, or they are partners since the very beginning. And I think we need to be very careful in the choice of words. Words matter, languages matter, and all of those things put together have implications for how we present our work. So it's important for us to understand that, look, it is very unfair if we are to, limit our relations with Russia or limit our relations with Iran just because Iran and Russia are both on good terms with India. And there's just one simple philosophy: you miss, I hit. I think if a country is surreptitiously or overtly aligning with your enemy, I think you should focus on that country more. Why should you leave space open for the Indians? If you just abandon that country because it is in a good partnership with India, that will give India more space. I, as a Pakistani, would not want India to gain more space than it already has. And this is where, again, I would stress why Pakistan's relations with the US are very important. India, ever since the end of the Cold War, has taken it upon itself to turn a page in its relations with the US. It targeted think tanks, it targeted universities, it targeted people on the Hill, and every person who mattered in and around the Beltway and in the overall DC community. Unfortunately, we were not in the picture in those in those 30 years. So we gave them everything on a platter. So this is not what you have to do. Why don't we work towards diversifying our foreign policy portfolio? We should go into Africa. I'm happy that the government has launched the Look Africa initiative. That's very important. We should not say that इंडिया अगर अफ्रीका में 10 रुपए इन्वेस्ट कर रहा है तो हम 6 रुपए करेंगे. अगर इंडिया कहीं नहीं इन्वेस्ट कर रहा, आप पहले चले जाएं, आपको क्या है? Why can't we be the trendsetters? And even a cursory look at Pakistan's history would tell you this one simple thing: that Pakistan में कुछ करना होता है, Pakistan कर लेता है. So if Pakistan wants to do it, Pakistan can do it. And what gives me hope is that there is complete unanimity of opinion. There is this realization that things have to change. There is also this realization that the way foreign policy was made before is outdated, and we need to involve many an actor in the entire scheme of things. We saw that in 2018, the government instituted the Prime Minister's Advisory Council on Foreign Affairs. Excellent initiative. The NSD is doing a very good job. There are challenges aplenty. But if we have taken this direction, I think that is only a step in the right direction. However, the proof lies in the pudding. So we need to ensure that these lofty aims do not only remain aims, but efforts should be started to achieve these aims in earnest. And for that to happen, it's important that our policies are consistent, our policies are clearly articulated, and our policies are dynamic, and they should be adaptive. So being inflexible, I take you back to Putin. So the crux of Putin's 20-year foreign policy outlook has been that he has realized that Russia needs a lot of reforms, Russia needs improvements galore before it could come back in the game. So he did that. And he had that one aim that we need to be a great power once again. But in doing that, he was tactically very flexible. So we have to be strategically sound, but we have to be tactically very flexible. And flexibility would help us open new vistas of opportunities. While those opportunities would be complemented by many threats, but our ability or the ability of our system to absorb the changing milieu and to absorb the very many new ideas that come to the fore through a variety of channels, that would determine what trajectory Pakistan is taking and will take going forward.
Right. And, talking about flexibility and talking about new approaches in, crafting your foreign policy, the recent Islamabad dialogue, I think initiatives like that are needed a lot. We need to have a space for younger academics and, thinkers to come into this space and give a space to people other than the traditional corridors of power when it comes to Pakistan's foreign policy making. So Ali, to bring it all together, my last question. So by now we've established that Ali does not think that Russia is a declining power. You believe that they want to reassert themselves, and that Russia and India do have a very, very deep relationship.
It's a nascent power, if I were to put
sure.
it.
And also that there will be growing cooperation between India and the US as we go forward. So what then should Pakistan aim for when it comes to our relations with Russia, other than what many people would like us to believe, that the only thing that we can get out of this is the S-400 maybe?
Okay. There's no harm in aiming for the S-400, but for that you need to have a very heavy pocket and work on expanding the pocket.
Do you think we need the S-400?
Why should we not need a system that can engage 36 targets simultaneously and simultaneously fire 72 missiles? Why would we not need a system that has a radar coverage of 600 kilometers and that can shoot down enemy aircraft, missiles and other things till a range of 400 kilometers? So if we have money, why not? But we need to expand the size of the pie. So we need to fill our coffers. We need to become an economic power to reckon with. So, and Russia would be more than willing to give you S-400 if you have the money to buy it. I think Pakistan, as I said earlier, Pakistan has to take what's on offer. Incremental steps, sans emotion and visceral, are the way to go. Russia is helping you with energy. Take it. Russia wants to supply you with weapons. So you should not be saying that, no, you're supplying us with assault rifles, but we don't need that. We need a nuclear submarine. No, this is not happening. So if it's giving you assault rifles, take it. Take them. Because for now, रशिया और आप दोनों ये चाहते हैं कि टेररिज्म इस रीजन में कर्टेल हो. तो अगर वो कर्टेल हो, अगर आपका बेनिफिट हो रहा है तो आप क्यों नहीं इसको ले? So that is important. It is very important for both countries to start working towards creating a very robust people-to-people relation. Scholarship शुरू कर सकते हैं. We can talk about student exchange programs. We can talk about academic cooperation, think tank cooperation. This is something that can happen. और इसमें कोई cost नहीं है. There is no cost to be incurred. So this could happen. And one of the keys that Pakistan should focus on is that Russia should be lured in to join CPEC, और वो CPEC plus N को आप आगे expand करें. Because अगर Russia, देखें Pakistan, Andrew Koripko, one of my friends, he has written a lot on these areas, on these issues. So उसने यही कहा है कि Pakistan is the zipper of Eurasia. So वो जो रशिया का Greater Eurasian Partnership है, which relies on linking up with the BRI. So Pakistan could be the ideal zipper or the ideal conduit for Russia to do that. So Pakistan has to ensure. And for that to happen, one of the tactical areas that Pakistan and Russia can cooperate on and continue to cooperate on, और जो आसान भी है, वो ये है कि Pakistan and Russia should match their notes when it comes to Afghanistan. They're already doing that, but they should continue doing that. Because that's very important. Because इस सब का linchpin जो है, वो peace in Afghanistan. So that's very important. So no spoiler should be allowed at any cost to harm this equation. मैं ये नहीं कह रहा कि जी पाकिस्तान ने रशिया को कैजोल कर लिया है या रशिया ने पाकिस्तान को कर लिया है, but the idea is कि अगर दोनों एक पेज पे हैं एक चीज में, चाहे उनके अलग अलग इंटरेस्ट हो, so we should take advantage of that. So आहिस्ता आहिस्ता, and going forward we should start a strategic dialogue between the two countries. लेकिन strategic dialogue तब शुरू होती है when you have a lot of agenda items on the table. So अभी the government of relations is small, so वो आहिस्ता आहिस्ता बढ़ेगा, क्योंकि we don't have a good history with them. We were enemies during the Cold War. लेकिन वो enemies वो indirect enemies थे. We were not like completely at loggerheads. Minus that 7th May 1960 U2 incident. उसके अलावा मतलब ये नहीं था कि we were completely at loggerheads. हालांकि we could bring in that Indo-Soviet treaty that was signed on 20th November 1971 that according to some played a very instrumental role in breaking and dismembering Pakistan. So I think bitter memories are there. So but now the equation has changed completely. So we need to be mindful of the challenges. We need to go slow. So going slow, but working towards developing a very durable relationship that is free from the constrictions of India, US. I know it's a difficult challenge. It is a difficult task. It's a tall order. But this is what we have to do. And this is what we need to work towards. और इसमें अगर आप बार-बार इंडिया को बीच में लाएंगे और अगर आप बार-बार क्रिप करेंगे इंडिया के बारे में, इंडिया भी करेगा क्रिप. Let me predict that as well. US भी करेगा. But we need to, keep quiet and अपनी line पे चलें और करें. And we will start with soft areas. Sports, climate change. So there are many areas in which we can work on. ताकि जब आप soft areas पे काम करते हैं तो आपकी expectations कम होती हैं. So जब expectations कम हैं तो there are less chances of friction. अगर हम अभी से high stakes बना लेंगे, like we start from tomorrow we start expecting that Russia is our savior. बस जी वो रशिया टैंक भेज रहा है, उसके बाद बस तबाहियां मच जाएंगी, तो फिर हमारा दिल ज़्यादा टूटेगा. तो दिल ज़्यादा टूटता है तो फिर प्रॉब्लम्स आती हैं. So keep it slow, be practical, be pragmatic, and go slow.
Absolutely. And for me, ultimately it all comes down to the old IR adage that there are no permanent friends or enemies in international politics.
Lord Palmerston, I have quoted him like 8 times since the past 2-3 days, and I would again repeat. And I think to wrap this up, I would like to say that it is critically important for us to understand the nuances of global politics. और ये as a subject लोगों को पढ़ाना चाहिए. Look, we can talk whatever we want to, sitting at home and on Twitter, but the realities are quite different. We are not like foreign, लेकिन domestic policy में आप जो freedom आपके domestic policy बनाने में होता है वो freedom आपके foreign policy में नहीं होता, because your policy, among other things, depends on the reaction and the resistance of the other party. आप unilaterally तो ये कह सकते हैं जी मैंने billion trees लगानी है पाकिस्तान में, लेकिन unilaterally आप ये नहीं कह सकते कि जी मैंने कश्मीर हल कर दी, क्योंकि that involves the other party as well. So ये नहीं हो सकता. So ये we need to understand कि foreign policy में जो constrictions होती हैं और जो limitations होती हैं वो domestic policy में नहीं होती. So we should use our freedom to act in the domestic realm to good effect. और अगर हम अपने आप को domestically strong कर लें तो that will pay us rich dividends when it comes to foreign policy approaches that we are likely to take going forward.
Well, and ultimately, I think to sum up, countries will only partner with us if we have some benefit for them. But at the same time, we should not compromise what's in our best interest as well. On that note, thank you so much, Ali. It was a very insightful conversation. I personally learned a lot. I hope our audience at home also got something out from it. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you everyone for tuning in, and we hope you'll tune in for future episodes as well. Thank you.